A previous presentation gave you the overall context for configured password profiles and explained why you may find it useful in meeting your security goals. This presentation tells you how to configure configured password profiles. There are 4 parts to configuring configured password profiles. There are the basic password policies, advanced password policies, lifecycle policies, and operational settings. The Apex User Guide and online help give examples of these configuration settings. These configuration settings apply to all users of configured password profiles. Although there are items in the individual user records that correspond to some of these settings, the overall configuration is global. For the basic password policies that have numeric values, setting the value to 0 disables the criterion, and setting it to anything greater than 0 enables it. Configured password profiles passwords may be up to 32 characters, but if a password is longer than 18 characters, the legacy password will be truncated at 18 characters. If either minimum password length or maximum password length is set to 0, the corresponding exec parameter min password length or max password length applies to configured password profiles passwords. You can require a new password to have different types of characters. Character group items include minimum uppercase characters, minimum lowercase characters, minimum numeric characters, and minimum special characters. For groups required, the range is 0 to the number of character group items that are enabled. If that is set to 0, then the group requirement is disabled and the policy uses individual character requirements. If Count Embedded Only is selected, then the first and last characters of a new password are not counted in alpha, upper, lower, number, or special character counts. For example, if John1 is a password and this option is selected, then the character counts would only use the 3 lowercase characters OHN. Thus, if a numeric character or a capital letter is required, John1 would not be accepted as a new password. When Enforce Password History, an option we'll look at in a few minutes, is configured, Count Embedded Only would prevent the user from using a series of similar passwords, like John1 followed by John2 and John3, because they would all look the same after the first and last characters were eliminated. Maximum keyboard sequence can be selected. You can select the maximum number of U.S. International Keyboard sequential characters that can be used in a password. And this includes both forward and reverse sequences. Case is ignored. So for example, suppose that the maximum keyboard sequence is 4. Then QWER is allowed because it's within that limit of 4. QWERT is not allowed because that's 5 in a row on the keyboard. TREWQ is not allowed because that's a reverse sequence. And Q with a capital W, E, capital RT is not allowed because the case is ignored. User ID Variance is the first of 8 advanced password policies. It lets you specify the number of characters by which a new password must differ from the user ID. The range is from 0 to 12. For example, if it's set to 2 and the user ID is Unisys, then neither Unisys1 nor Unisys with the first S changed to a $sign can be used as the new password, but the password can be Unisys with both of those changes made. Unisys with the capital U and capital S and the others lowercase changes capitalization, but the variance is computed using case insensitivity, so this too would be rejected as a new password. Furthermore, the user ID cannot be contained wholly within the password, and Unisys 2014 includes the user ID Unisys. User information variance is a similar option. And if it's selected, then the data in a user ID's information tab is parsed into tokens. Each token greater than 2 characters in length is checked to ensure that the password varies by at least the length of token divided by 2 characters with that number truncated. Then the variance is computed using case insensitivity. The Information tab, by the way, can be customized for each system, but in general it's expected to contain the user's personal information such as name, address, phone numbers, and other information that might be readily found on the internet and thus might be easy for a hacker to guess. If you fail this check, then you'll get a message like the one you see on the screen. Password too similar to your personal information. New password not accepted. Please enter another. Here's an example. Let's suppose that your location is East Terwilliger Perimeter. Now, Terwilliger has 11 characters. Therefore, a password like TERWILLFOUR would not be accepted because it has to differ by at least 11/2 truncated, which is 5 characters from Terwilliger. On the other hand, if you eliminate that T and start with the E, it's okay because only exact positions are compared, and count embedded only doesn't affect user information variance. Now notice that the department says virtual lost and found. That AND is a token too, and therefore ANDover could not be used as a password because the first 3 characters of it have to differ by 1 character from AND. Password variance is the number of characters by which a new password must differ from the current password. The range is from 0 to the number specified by the maximum password length option. The comparison is made using case insensitivity. So for example, assume the current password is anytown1. If you try to use anytown12345 as the new password, it'll be rejected because the first 8 characters must differ by 3 characters in this example from anytown1. That'll give a message like this, and you'll be asked to enter a different new password. On the other hand, if you entered ON8TOWN2, that would be okay because there are 3 characters that differ from the current password. The dictionary is a list of words and symbols. The dictionary comparison is a case-insensitive check. Select one of the options shown on the screen to set the level of influence the dictionary has with new passwords. If it's disabled, the dictionary is not used. Anchored means a new password cannot be identical to any dictionary entry. Floating means the password can't contain a dictionary entry. Anchored reverse means a new password cannot be identical to any dictionary or any dictionary entry in reverse order. And floating reverse means the password can't contain a dictionary entry in forward or reverse order. So for example, suppose that you've put let me in into the dictionary file. In anchored, floating, anchored reverse, and floating reverse, let me in will be rejected as a new password. If you reverse the letters of it, then in anchored mode it will be accepted as a password, and in floating mode it will. Both of the reverses will reject it because it's the reverse of a word in the dictionary file. If you add some characters to the beginning of it, then again anchored will accept it. Floating won't because the password can't contain a dictionary word. Anchored reverse will accept it, but floating reverse will reject it because remember, although it's called reverse, it also includes the forward method as well. If you take 4 characters from the middle of let me in, assuming that a 4-character password is okay, then all 4 of these methods of checking for passwords in the dictionary will allow it. Installing user authentication installs the file sys$lib$am19-dict, which is delivered empty. You create your own dictionary list in this file. Often this list will include a combination of ordinary dictionary words and words unique to the enterprise, such as project names. This file must be in SDF formatted, sorted. It must have no capital letters and no entry less than 3 characters or greater than 32 characters. It must not exceed 100,000 tracks, which gives you about 50 million entries, and it must not be altered while CPP is active. Configured Password Profiles calculates a password strength based on the password length and several other factors. Select one of the drop-down values to determine how the password strength option is used. If it's disabled, the option is not used. Display means the password strength is displayed at the user's terminal. Choice means the user is given the option to accept or reject the password based on the strength displayed. For minimum choice, if the password strength is less than the required password strength, the user is given the option to accept or reject the password. And if it's reject, the password is rejected if the computed strength is less than the required minimum password strength. Now you can select one of the options shown here to set the strength level a password must have for acceptance if the password strength option is set to minimum choice or reject. It can be very weak, weak, moderate, strong, or very strong. So for example, if the password strength option is reject and the required password strength is moderate and the user enters a new password whose strength is weak, configured password profiles will reject it and tell the user to enter another password. You can specify the minimum number of previous passwords that cannot be reused. Remember the PCI DSS requirement that we talked about earlier. Do not allow an individual to submit a new password that's the same as any of the last 4 passwords or phrases that he or she has used. This is the advanced password policy that lets you comply with that requirement. The maximum number of previous passwords that can be retained is 32, and if it's set to 0, this requirement is disabled. Now you might want to let users reuse previous passwords after enough time has elapsed, even if those passwords would have been prohibited by the setting of enforced password history. That's where password reuse expiration comes in. For example, suppose enforced password history is set to 5 and password reuse expiration is set to 180 days. If the user's previous 5 passwords were changed 30, 70, 110, 150, and 190 days ago, the user is allowed to reuse the one from 190 days ago, even though enforced password history is set to 5. The range for password use expiration is from 0 to 3660, which is about 10 years. If password use expiration is set to 0, the password history restriction on password reuse is strictly enforced. Minimum and maximum password age are the first 2 of 5 lifecycle policies. If the minimum or maximum password age is set greater than 0, then the specified value applies to all user IDs that use configured password profiles. If it's set to 0, then the value given by the exec parameters default min days password or default max days password are used, and any overrides configured in individual user IDs will take effect. In the warning period field, you can enter the number of days before a password expires that the user will be warned about the expiration. The range is from 0 to the maximum password age. If it's set to 0, the warning is disabled. You can select a value to determine the expiration period of the first configured password profile's password for a user ID. If it's immediate, then the legacy password immediately expires, and the expiration period for the first configured password profile's password is set to the configured maximum password age. If it's random, then the legacy password expires immediately, and the first password expiration period for the user ID is set to a random number between 1 and the expiration period defined by the maximum password age. If you're converting a lot of users to configured password profiles at the same time, this option ensures that all of their passwords don't expire on the same day, which could result in an administrator overload. If legacy is the option, then the initial password is the legacy password. And if the legacy password was case insensitive, it's changed to case sensitive. This password expires based on the legacy last password change date. You can enter a number for the length of time in hours that a password that has been reset by an administrator is valid. If the time is exceeded, the password must be reset by an administrator again before the user will be able to sign on. If set to 0, the capability is disabled. If it's non-zero, it can be up to 336 hours, which is 14 days. Confirm password change is the first of 4 operational settings. Select this option to require that the user enter the new password a second time and ensure that the first and second password entries match. This option reduces the number of misspelled passwords. The self-service password reset option allows a user to reset his own password without knowing the current password if he can answer the specified personal question successfully. Select a number from 1 to 8 to specify the number of self-reset answers that will be needed to initialize the self-reset questions. The answers have to meet certain criteria described in the Apex User Guide and online help. Self-service password reset is initiated when a user responds to the Enter User ID password solicitation with "forgot" as his password. The password reset questions you see here are the defaults. They're kept in the ELMS database so they can be configured on a site basis. Every user uses these same questions, but the answers are on a per user basis and kept in the individual user's security record. Security Officer User Identity is a useful option for sites that let more than one person act as the security officer. With this option selected, if the security officer's user ID is configured to use configured password profiles, a user who signs on with the security officer user ID is required to enter his own user ID and password in addition to the security officer user ID and password. A console message is sent indicating which user ID is acting as the security officer. This message is logged, providing a way to audit the use of the security officer credentials. The ASUS subsystem owner requires the SS read exec privilege in order to read the name of the security officer from the exec configuration. Select the Login Time Constraints option to enable sign-on restrictions based on the day of the week and time of day. Deselect this option to disable. When enabled, time constraints can be configured for user IDs that use configured password profiles using the Apex User ID Access tab. Thank you.